Good morning, evening, everyone. I'm YNN meteorologist Ryan Finn with a look at your statewide weather forecast. We will pick up on a wide range of weather here for tonight and as we head into your Tuesday. Many areas around central New York up towards, say, Watertown and around the capital region. Not seeing much in the way of flurries or snow showers this evening, but as you can see, some flurries and a few heavier lake effect squalls down towards, say, Binghamton and Ithaca. We will see some of these flurries and snow showers pick up across central New York here throughout the overnight, but really not a whole lot going on around the immediate capital region. Everybody, though, seeing the wind chills here tonight at or below zero, so that's what you'll want to dress for here if you have to head out and about here this evening and first thing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, a much warmer day area-wide. We're likely looking at temperatures in the upper 20s to lower 30s, but we're going to have that gusty wind around once again, so wind chills likely down the teens. Stay tuned. We will have another look at your weather forecast right after Capital Tonight.
Tonight, Insiders Edition. Is there no end to the drama in New York politics? 2010 was another banner year, full of indictments, battles, triumphs, and betrayals. We saw a governor forced from the public stage by scandal, and an attorney general whose career was once viewed as over rise again to claim the state's top job. The elections dominated the news, filling the papers with headlines, your mailboxes with glossy flyers, and your TV screen with ads. We'll remember it all with our insiders in a special year-end review as Capital Tonight starts right now. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Capital Tonight. I'm Liz Benjamin. Well, it has been a wild year in New York politics, but really, why should this year be any different? And all this week, we will be looking back on some of the biggest stories of 2010 as part of our Year in Review series. Now, of course, this year was dominated by the elections, and as you'll recall, every statewide office and all 212 legislative seats were up for grabs. For months, the airwaves were filled with political ads, and your mailboxes were filled with direct mailings. In the end, Democrats managed to buck a national trend and hold on to all of the statewide offices, but they did lose control of the state Senate and also conceded 6 House seats. Now, the story of these races is the focus of tonight's special expanded edition of Our Insiders. Joining us are Dave Catalfamo and Bob Bellafiore. They are both former Pataki aides. Dave is now a partner at Capital Public Strategies, and Bob is the vice president of National Heritage Academies, a charter school advocacy group. Across the table from them, we see Steve Greenberg and Bruce Jory. Steve is a former communications director to 2 assembly speakers, now a pollster for Siena College, and Bruce is a former senior advisor to 2 governors, now a strategic consultant for Corning Place Consulting. Thank you for joining us tonight, guys. Everyone, thank you very much. And also a UAlbany professor, is that correct?
Yes, adjunct.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Now we get everybody's titles done.
You're very kind.
You're welcome. So we're going to start with the elections. As I mentioned, I think that the overarching sort of story, everything that happened in Albany really was contained in these elections, seen through that lens. And at this time last year, we actually thought we might have a gubernatorial primary, and that turned out not to be. And I just am curious, Andrew Cuomo would have won, right? He would have defeated David Paterson. Bruce, do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
You think it would have been a bloodbath, or it would have been just a walk in the park?
I think there's a reason that Governor Paterson decided not to run, and I think he saw that it would not be a tightly contested or an evenly contested race. He would have been outspent. He was way behind in the polls, and so he avoided what would have been probably a landslide victory for Andrew Cuomo rather than a bloodbath. It would have been, I think, embarrassing to the governor if he had run in that primary. And I think he showed grace in pulling out.
Do you guys agree with that? Would it have been racially divisive, as that was the concern? You're nodding, Dave, yes?
Yeah, it would have exacerbated what were perceived to be the Attorney General's problems with the minority community going back to his last attempt to run for governor when he ran against my old boss, where he primaried Carl McCall. And so there were definitely some hard feelings that were left there. I think he worked through them. But a primary obviously would have exacerbated them and possibly, made an opening that others could have taken advantage of.
But his support actually, poll-wise, among African-American voters is pretty strong, no?
Was always strong. Since his first run for Attorney General 4 years ago, he has done very well. His problem was with the leadership in the African-American community. But I think Bruce nailed it on the head. I mean, he wound up getting out in light of the whole David Johnson issue and that story coming to light, and the Yankee ticket story when that first broke in February, that's when he decided to get out. I think ultimately he was never going to be in it. He had to get out. That was a convenient time for him to get out. But as Bruce said, he was going to be outspent. He was outpolled.
He didn't have Obama.
He didn't have anything. He had no support. And not even a real base of support, because within the African American community, among voters, Cuomo was beating Patterson heading into when the governor ultimately decided not to run.
I think it still would have been trickier, though, for Andrew Cuomo had David Patterson been in the race.
question.
But as it was, David Patterson took himself out. Andrew Cuomo packed up his daughters into the RV and cruised to re-election. He hardly had to break a sweat for all of those months. If David Patterson had been in a primary with him, he would have had to been much more careful and much more deliberate about what he said and did throughout the campaign.
But better for New York in the end, do you think? I mean, there's always been sort of this hypothesis that some people would say it's better to fight for it. It's actually better if you have to be tested, if you have to be pushed, if you've got to be ready. I mean, yes, it's true that we've seen 7 or 8 policy books from Andrew Cuomo, but he does really come in not being forced to be on the offensive terribly much at all.
Well, I don't think that's David Patterson's fault. I think that's the Republican Party's fault.
Yeah.
The Republican Party failed to come up with a viable candidate to
The other thing that Andrew Cuomo,
sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
The other thing that Andrew Cuomo did is he established a real hold on the vital center of the electorate, and the Republicans did not have any real open flanks to shoot at. He took the property tax cap issue, he took the spending cap issue, he took the tax issue off the table. I mean, in addition to Carl Palladino being a rather, let me be generous, an exotic, kind of unorthodox, asymmetrical candidate, he had no shots at to take at Andrew Cuomo. The center was guarded. That led him to be more desperate, which led him to make the sorts of mistakes that made him a laughing stock.
But if you had a real Republican opponent, one who was financed, one who was more mainstream and got along
Carl
with...
Palladino was financed. The
No,
man
he really
spent
wasn't.
money.
He didn't, what did he wind up
Less
spending?
than $10 million in the end.
Yeah,
True.
right. In the general election, he wound up spending what, about $4 million? That's not a financed gubernatorial campaign. If you had a real Republican opponent, Andrew Cuomo, I'm not sure would have necessarily owned those issues in the center. And then I think you would have had a real fight. I don't think the Democratic primary issue would have created it, because ultimately Patterson and Cuomo were going to be alike on far more issues than they were unalike. Sure. Whereas if you had a real Republican debate, or a real gubernatorial debate between Cuomo and a real Republican, then we might have had an interesting election.
But the Republicans actually are supposed to be the party of discipline. What happened to that? You guys were supposed to deliver to us.
Yeah, what happened, David?
Talk to us, David. Talk to us about that.
We messed up. You know, I mean, Bruce was kind. Bruce was kind. Exotic would be kind. You know, but more to the first point, the reality is that Andrew Cuomo wasn't tested. I mean, he had a cakewalk of a campaign. He was disciplined. He didn't make any mistakes, which was good. But doesn't tell us much about what kind of governor he's going to be, because he really didn't have to react to any crises or react to any kind of challenge with respect to his positioning. And really, where that will be meaningful as we look to the year ahead will be, you know, whether or not he can make the structural changes that we need to make in New York moving forward.
And let's look at what might have been. I mean, you had the potential, the Republicans, to put together a strong statewide ticket for every race other than governor. Rick Lazio would have made an excellent candidate against Kirsten Gillibrand. He was strong where she was weak, the suburbs. He had credentials as a former member of Congress. Passed on that race, then the Republicans did not have a serious candidate against Gillibrand. Dan Donovan, on paper, made a good candidate, but he couldn't raise 2 nickels together. He could not expose Schneider.
He didn't want to travel. Also, he didn't want to leave.
Right.
He didn't want to leave Staten Island.
And that left poor Harry Wilson running alone, which was your strongest race, and who did a great job of lining up editorial endorsements, but because he had to do everything on his own, came up just short.
How much do you think, Bob, that Carl Palladino actually tanked Harry Wilson, that tanked Dan Donovan to the degree they did, and the weird thing is, didn't cost the GOP the Senate majority? I mean, it doesn't. There's no straight storyline that I can see out of that.
You're right. It's not like sort of a simple dart against the wall. Right. I think Palladino did some damage to the Republican brand, but I think Donovan hurt himself by not traveling up, not going upstate. I think Harry Wilson hurt himself much in the same way, and I think Donovan got hurt because in the last 4 days, Andrew Cuomo became a Siamese twin with Eric Schneiderman, and I think some of that Cuomo aura and coattails spilled over to Schneiderman.
There's also Republicans cannot win statewide unless they can crack into the minority vote. The exit polls showed that the aggregate minority vote was 29%. Palladino lost it by over 4 to 1. Cuomo got over 90% of African Americans, over 80% of Hispanics, 2/3 of Asian, and a very high number amongst biracial, although there was no polling data on that, but you can presume it. And that was 29% of the total vote. Now, compare that to what George Pataki did in his last run, where he got 45% of the Hispanic vote, or Mike Bloomberg, who at different times has gotten over 40% of either the black or the Hispanic, depending on that. So unless the Republicans reach out and practice outreach on diversity to the full panoply of New York voters, they're going to have a problem.
And compound that for a second, Bruce. I think you're exactly right, but compound it. We saw actually a reverse in the trend this year, where actually New York City's percentage of the voters went up this year compared to what it had been in previous gubernatorial elections.
But some of that is a very good field operation. I mean, Andrew Cuomo put in $2 million to the state party, in part to bring out the votes.
And I agree with what you're saying, but the reality is also that Palladino hit a firewall in Rochester. I mean, basically, Buffalo to Rochester, you had great numbers, and then Rochester East, it was destroyed.
But that's...
And those numbers, I mean, if Palladino had performed favorably in those areas and then better in Westchester, I think that pulls Harry over.
But isn't that also...
Maybe it does.
Hold on, wait.
Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, because what the voters showed this year, go back to your original premise, the Democrats win all the statewide offices, Republicans pick up 6 congressional seats, more in New York than in any other state. Republicans pick up net 2 Senate seats to take back Senate control. What the voters showed this year is they don't have a problem going A-B, A-B, A-B.
That's correct.
And the new machines help with that.
Isn't it, though, a message, is it not a message to Andrew Cuomo that, Bob, or anybody, that really you can't discount Western New York? Western New York obviously feels angry, disconnected, and really, you know, somebody needs to talk to them. Eliot Spitzer tried, actually, in 2006. He held the state Democratic convention in Buffalo. He was going to make a big push in Buffalo. Now, of course, we know what happened to Eliot Spitzer, but isn't it just a sign there's warning lights flashing in the western part of the state?
Well, every governor back to Mario Cuomo has tried to figure out how to deal with the issue of the Western New York economy and what their problems are. But I think what the Western New York people would tell you is, I'm tired of the talk. Don't give me the symbolism. Don't say your economic development director, like Eliot Spitzer tried to say, is going to live in Buffalo.
Right.
Don't have your convention out here. Do some stuff that matters. But don't give us symbolism. Don't give us talk. And don't give us ribbon cuttings. Give us actual results. Things that are going to affect property taxes. Things that are going to help them create jobs, and things that are going to turn that economy around.
Okay, let's talk about the state Senate for a second. And can they hold it longer than 2 years? Because I don't know if they can.
What makes you think they can hold it for 2 years?
Okay, expound.
Well, I mean, you have 32 Republican senators right now. There are several of them who are over 80, who are... I'm not sure how their health is. I hope it's good for their sake. But the truth of the matter is, what we've seen over the last several years in New York is either from death, taking other jobs, or indictments. You can't count on those 62 senators who were elected in November being senators for the next 2 years.
And also, though, the Democrats, actually, the problem for them is they're $2 million in debt. And they're going to have a hard time, particularly raising the money, no?
But there's another thing that cropped up this year. This was the first year where the races were not really controlled solely by the central campaign committees. The Democrats early on, they didn't really think they were going to win the Rockland County seat against Scott Vanderhoff, who had won with like 60% a year before re-election, but then putting in a 13% property tax increase kind of took that off the table. The Republicans thought they really were going to win in the Western New York seat. They thought Quinn was going to beat Kennedy after a divisive primary. It didn't. I think you're going to start to see races crop up locally based from local Democratic and Republican parties, maybe independent candidates, and that there's going to be a lot of energy out there, and it may not be driven by what Albany thinks. In the recent past, all legislative races have really been driven by the central committees.
Okay, let's assume.
Those days may be over as far as the Senate's concerned.
Let's assume, though, that the Democrats managed to hold it for the next 2 years, or sorry, the Republicans, in some way, and they managed to control the redistricting process.
Right.
There's supposed to be some kind of reform of redistricting, although it's unclear what that will be. Is there any way the Republicans can draw the lines such that in a presidential year they will actually maintain control of the Senate, given what we've seen in terms of enrollment statistics? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. You can redraw the Grisanti seat to make it, more Republican. You can redraw some of the seats in Western New York and the Buffalo area, I think, to carve out, a safe Republican seat there. I think down in Westchester we can revisit the Cohen seat and make that a seat that's more winnable. So yeah, I think that there's a way to
Wait, hold
for
it.
Republicans.
It's now the law of the state of New York after the prison. You can no longer use the prison population to supplement
Forgot
these
about that.
districts.
Right.
You're not going to change that law. I think it's going to be very difficult unless the Republicans campaign with good candidates in areas where they have not been comfortable campaigning. If you look at where they've lost these seats, for the most part, not exclusively, but excluding Valesky and Obertine, where they've lost is where the minority population is over 15, 20% of the vote.
Okay, we have to take a brief break. We're going to be back. Okay, so let's just hold this thought. When we return, we'll be turning our attention to the year ahead, from Andrew Cuomo's transition to the budget battle. We're sure to see a little bit more of the legislature. Our special edition of Capitol Tonight continues right after this break.